Test, test. Okay. Yep. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I see there are already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people in the classroom. So please contact your classmates to go into the classroom. And yeah, welcome Azuri, Kalush, Nicholas, Muhammad Attar, Raizas, Nicholas, David, Halawan, Diwa, Moza, Gazian, Vico, Dylan, Julian, and also Nafis. While we are waiting for the others, let me ask you several questions first. Is there any issue with the previous lab or the assignment? Or everything just went well during the lab and also in your first assignment?
So I'm heading out to do some clam hunting in the mud on the seafloor.
Oh, wait, what was that sound? Yeah, somebody private message me, send me a private message. 1,000 words is a lot, sir. Yeah, I feel you with that. But yeah, that's inevitable. In some cases where you have to write English prose, like when you are taking TOEFL or IELTS tests, you have to do that. So yeah, this is also to make you exercise yourself in writing in English. And yeah, especially if you are going to work in your future career path, like as software engineer or as an academician, writing is one part of your life. So yeah, make this habit. Yeah, continuing the question from the same person through that sent me a message through the direct message. Yeah, you are allowed to use bullet points and numbering in your essay, but if you're using lists and also or a numbered list, so you make sure it is described properly. I mean, you cannot make a content like in a clickbait site, okay? In clickbait site, often they just mention lists and also accompanied with some images, but doesn't provide any further explanation regarding the list or provide additional value than explaining the items in the list. So in this case, to answer your question, you are allowed to use numbered list or bullet points in your essay, but make sure you provide the description or the context that is related to the list that you write in your paper. That's my answer regarding whether you're allowed to use bullet points or numbering in your essay. And I suppose we can start the class now. It's already 22 persons in the classroom, so welcome everyone. So let's begin with the class. So today we will discuss about introduction to the internet and web framework. And this is also related to one question asked from your classmates last week. I believe he asked whether we will discuss about server-side programming and client-side programming. Well, about that, it will be briefly explained in this slide. So yeah, stay tuned. And also, hello to everyone who might be watching from YouTube. If you have any question, yeah, just raise your question in the chat room. Okay, without further ado, let's start with the class. And yeah, this already been mentioned before. In this course, we will learn how to build a web application and a mobile application. So at least if you are going to pass this course, make sure that at the end of this course, you are able to create a web application and also a mobile application. If you can do both of that, I think you are qualified to pass this course. But still, there are also some other evaluation components related to this course. So also make sure you are displayed good performance to get good evaluation on those evaluation components as well. But at least after you finish this course, you're able to create a web application and also a mobile application. Because right now, most of our daily life revolving around application, right? If you want to go somewhere else or order food, you use a mobile application. For example, Uber Eats or Gojek or GrabFood to order your food to be delivered to your home. And if you want to learn about this course, you have to access the Scali learning management system. So you have to use a web application to know to download some slides and also to know the latest information from the course. So yeah, pretty much almost everything right now revolving around application. And the application can be used from your web browser or from your mobile devices. And is there anything else, other examples of using web application and mobile application that I haven't mentioned before? Maybe you know some other use cases for using web application or mobile application. Yeah, one more example is for entertainment purpose. Back then, when I was a child, if I want to play, I have to go outside. I think most of you also do the same. But right now, we can see that if you have a younger siblings, you will probably see that your younger siblings might spend a quarter or probably almost half of their time in watching YouTube or playing games on their mobile phones instead of playing outside. So it's like apps already becoming a part of our life. But yeah, in my opinion, even if we already have so many apps out there that we can use for our convenience, please don't forget to go back to the real world. Like, yeah, go outside, touch some grass, or yeah, interact with each other, with other people directly face to face instead of communicating from chat platforms. And yeah, everyone's being or using smartphones, and that also makes our course to become more important since almost everyone have a smartphone nowadays. So if we want to reach out those persons, then we can solve their problem by developing a mobile application, for example. And let's start with a simple example. So let me show you a search engine. Like I use DuckDuckGo as my primary search engine. Some of you may be using google.com or Bing or maybe Yahoo. I don't know if it's still a thing to search the web using Yahoo. But let's say I pick DuckDuckGo as a search engine. And if I open it, yeah, the landing page is a bit different, but yeah, this is the landing page of DuckDuckGo. So from my device, from my web browser to be exact, I can search anything like what is the current weather? And the current weather is, yeah, it's currently 29 degrees outside. And yeah, somehow the browser can also know the approximate location of myself. And yeah, it also displays several other information. So this is one example of search engine. And let me ask you one question. What do you do if you want to open your search engine through your web browser? What is the procedure to open a search engine through your web browser? Can anyone explain it to me, to the class? You can speak, or you can also type your suggestions through the Zoom chat feature. So what do you do to open a search engine through your web browser? What are the steps? Or maybe I should randomly pick a person from the Zoom room. So let me ask Kalush, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here, sir.
Yeah. What do you do in order to open a web browser through your web browser? What do you do if you want to open a search engine from your web browser?
Doesn't it open automatically, sir?
Open up what? Can you repeat it?
Doesn't it open up automatically, sir?
Oh, okay, cool. So in Kalu's example, the search engine already pop up automatically. Cool. Okay. And somebody in the chat through direct message, yeah, you can also do that. Yeah, because nowadays search engine already like embedded in the web browser. So if you want to search something, you can type it directly in the first page that pop up in your web browser. So yeah, if I want to search for coffee recipe, I can just type it here. And then it will perform a search query to the search engine, and the search engine will display the results. But then another question is, once you yep. So once you type your search query like coffee recipe, do you know what happened in the process after you click the enter button? Yeah, it's okay, Nicholas. Once you click the enter button, do you know what happened between your web browser to the search engine? Or do you have any ideas what happened in the background when you submitted the search query to the search engine? Maybe you have the raw ideas what will happen in the process. No one? That's okay. Yeah, because in this case, in this example, to submit a search query to a search engine, well, we as the user look at it, maybe we thought that it's pretty simple. For example, maybe you have an idea whenever your search engine receives the search query, then you will perform an iteration throughout all of the documents that you have in your array list, for example, or in a text file, and see whether the given query matches one of those strings in your collection. But actually, search engine is more complex than that. But we won't go that way. You will learn about this in another course called information retrieval. It is an elective course here in this faculty, and if you're interested more, you can take that course later on. So let me give you one illustration. Let's say when your browser, when you type the address to your search engine, let's say duckduckgo.com, your request will be sent to the server owned by DuckDuckGo through the internet. So your computer that is running a web browser will send a message to the server. Hey, server, get me the landing page of duckduckgo.com at this address. And while doing so, there are a lot of more things happening in the background, but let's just focus on the sending and receiving messages between the laptop and the server. So once your laptop sends a request to the server will receive that request and see, is the request valid and match with the features existed or running in the server. And if the request is valid and there is a feature in the application running on the server that can handle that request, the server will send back a web page. So it will send the document containing the elements that will be displayed on in your web browser back to your laptop. And let's say if you want to perform a search query using your search engine, like in this example, by using a search engine, usually you want to find relevant pages related to your query. So for example, if you want to search for the latest score from Premier League matches, you might be typing score from Arsenal matches or from Manchester City matches in your search engine, and you hope the search engine will provide you with the actual results, right? So you type the search query into the input form provided in the search engine display, and then the request containing your search query will be sent to the server. And then the server will handle that and then perform the searching to look for relevant pages related to your query. And if the search engine able to find the results will be displayed as web page, and then the web page is sent back to your web browser. So it will display the results in the next page displayed in the web browser. Yeah, and this is only an overview, like a 10,000 feet overview of the process between your web browser and a server that running a web application. If you want to go deeper, we have other courses that handle that. For example, if you want to learn more how to design and create a search engine, you can take an elective course called Information Retrieval here in this faculty. You will see that developing a search engine is not that simple as some people might have thought in the internet. And then how the internet works itself, like when you type https://duckduckgo.com and then click enter in your web browser, there are a lot more process happening. For example, the domain name, the duckduckgo.com, needs to be resolved to an IP address that can be contacted from your network interface in your computer. And the details can very deep, and you will learn more about that in the computer networks course in this faculty. I believe it is a mandatory course, so eventually you will learn about that. And how to set up the server to run your web application. It is covered by operating system course, because many web applications and also services that supports mobile application are running on a server that is using Linux-based operating system. So in the operating system course, you will learn more about Linux and how it works. And yeah, operating system is also a mandatory course, so you will eventually take that course in the future. Now, the web page, how to create a web page, how to implement user interaction, and also how to handle user interaction from the web browser in the server in form of developing a web application. Those knowledge and skills will be taught in this course. So yeah, how to create a good looking web pages, how to design it, and how to create the web application that will serve those web pages. Those things will be the core competences that will be taught in this course. So yeah, that's a quick overview on how the internet works. Any questions so far before we proceed to the next slides? Nothing? No questions? Okay. And yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So basically, internet is a global network of computers. So through the internet, we can have a lot of services, applications hosted on addresses that we can access using a client. In this case, the client can be a web browser or a mobile application. So the slides that you are currently seeing here is hosted on Google Docs, where Google Docs is running in a server owned by Google. And that same server is accessed from my computer here using this address, https://docs.google.com, etc. So it already involving at least 2 computers, and might be even more actually if we go deeper into the actual architectural detail of Google infrastructure. It could involve more than 1 computer or servers in order to display this same page from my own web browser. But essentially, internet will have a network of computers. A web application in Google server, and another application in Facebook server, those are interconnected through a network. And in order to access the resources like the web pages, the application, and also to access the files, images hosted on a website in the internet, we need to have an identifier mechanism in order to able to fetch those resources. So we start from the superset of the identifier mechanism called URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. So it gives a unique identifier to a resource of a certain concept in a domain. Like for a book, we uniquely identify every book via its ISBN number. And that the same ISBN number can be used later on to describe a book in a web page. If one or if an e-commerce shop or a website choose to do so to identify each group through its ISBN number. That's possible. And from among those identifiers, we have a more specific identifier mechanisms, like the one that we usually use, URL, the one that we usually type in the address bar in web browser. URL is a more specific form of URI, where we type the location of resource in the web browser. So when we type https://google.com, we specifically requested google.com as the one who may contain the resource that we requested to fetch the web page associated with google.com back to the web browser. So yeah, we have URL as the identifier of a document or resources. Usually it is written in this form, start with the communication protocol, which either HTTP or HTTPS if we are accessing the URL through the web browser, and then followed by the host like google.com or Facebook or twitter.com, or localhost if we are referring to the application running in the same computer as the one that you're currently using, and then followed by port. And this is optional actually. Port only needed if you are trying to access a URL that is not served using the default HTTP or HTTPS port. So by default, if you are using HTTP protocol to communicate with a website, then implicitly if you try to type google.com, this example actually contain this, the port 80, because port 80 is the standard that will be mapped to HTTP protocol. So whenever you type a domain name using HTTP protocol, then implicitly the web browser will insert this port 80 in the URL. Similar thing also happen when you try to access a domain using the HTTPS protocol. Implicitly, the web browser will insert this port 443 because that's the standard port for HTTPS protocol in URL. Other than port 80 and 443, you need to specify the port number explicitly. For example, port 8000 or port 8080, and yeah, any other port, depending on the application or website that you want to access. If your application is open at a certain domain on port 12345, then you have to access that application through that domain and then explicitly mention the port colon 12345 in order to access the application. So the URL is associated with the web page that you want to get using your web browser. And in order to fetch that web page, it needs to communicate with the website, or more precisely with the server that contains in the website using a communication protocol, either HTTP or HTTPS. So let's see some examples I already mentioned DuckDuckGo.com. So HTTPS here is the communication protocol, and it is a secure protocol. It means that the data transmission between your web browser to the web application is encrypted. Nobody, at least as long no other person has access to the keys associated that is used in the transmission, then nobody will be able to inspect the content of the data transmission. So it's secure. Nobody can look whatever you submitted to a website in the transmission. But when your data already received at the other ends, we do not know. It could be still encrypted, or it could be decrypted and it's already available as plain text data that will be either forwarded to another server or received directly by the web application. The DuckDuckGo here is the domain name. As I mentioned before, everything in the internet will run on a computer, and a computer will have an IP address. So for example, okay, I have this access to a server hosted in the faculty's infrastructure. I can give you the IP address here. So internally in the faculty's network, this server is known as 10.119.105.12. So this is the IP address of the server internally in the faculty's network. But then, if we want to access a site that is hosted in this server, for example, I can type this in the web browser, PMPL CSUI CED. And this website actually running in this machine. So from my web browser, I send a request to this domain name, and that domain name, the pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id, will be resolved to an IP address associated with that domain. So, for a query here, so this domain, pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id, is associated with this IP address, 152.118.148.93. So this is the IP address. But again, the IP address is different. You see here, the server is only addressable through the IP 10.119. But when we try to access the server from the outside via the domain name, the IP is different. This is common if you are looking at the common internet infrastructure. So usually a server can have an internal IP address and an external IP address. So in this example, pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id has an external IP address, which is actually another server. And that server will route any request to the pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id, this domain name, to another server that matches the rule defined in this public server. So when I send this request to get the pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id website, the public facing server here will reroute the request into an internal server that associated with this website. In this case, the internal server here is a server with IP 10.119. So back to the slide. It seems similar thing also happened with DuckDuckGo. So if we look at DuckDuckGo, DuckDuckGo has this IP address 20.43.161.105. If we try to type it in the web browser, yeah, it resolves back to duckduckgo.com. So you can access the website using the domain name or directly using the IP address. But this not applies universally. It also depends on what has been configured in the server side. A server might reject any attempt to access the website using IP address. That is also possible to configure in the server side. But in this example, turns out DuckDuckGo can be accessed by using the domain name and also the IP address. So the domain name will be resolved to an IP address that can be used in the communication mechanism between your web browser to the web application. And yeah, the domain name actually also contains a top-level domain. In this case, the .com, .id, .uk, those are top-level domains, and it is usually managed by the domain registrar, an organization that manages domain name allocation in a country or in an organization. So if you want to create a new domain, like I want to create a domain called mycoolapp.com, I have to ask a domain registrar to allocate that domain to me. But yeah, it is not free, so you have to pay a certain amount of money in order to get a domain name that can be associated with a server that you own. Another example is this. So yeah, this is a URL to a YouTube video. You can open it later outside the class, online class. And if we look at the parts of the URL, see that there is a subdomain name before the actual domain name. So before the youtube.com, there is a www. That www is subdomain name. So we can have a subdomain under a domain. For example, this site, pmpl.cs.ui.ac.id, is a subdomain of cs.ui.ac.id. And if you try to access cs.ui.ac.id, it goes to the faculty's website. And let me also see. The faculty's website in this domain can be accessed by using its IP address at this address. So if you type 152.118 something, usually it will be redirected to the faculty's website. And yeah, it's not okay. So we have this subdomain PMPL, and then if we remove it, we go to the faculty's website, and we can still remove the subdomain ui.ac.id, and this will go to the university's web page. But then if we go to ac.id, what will happen? HTTP, right? Is it possible? No. ac.id is actually a TLD, at the top level domain, granted only for educational institutions. And if you want to get an ac.id domain, then you have to ask the appropriate DNS registrar to get a domain name under that top level domain. But yeah, continuing the example, the URL here contains another component that is not found in previous example. So in this YouTube URL, there is another component called path. So it is not only the youtube.com domain name, it's also followed by a string, and that string, that is the /watch question mark v equal to the dqw something. That is a part of the path. And the path here usually referring to the resource or document that you want to access in that website. So in this example, the watch here is a path, and that path can have a query string. And the query string here is a key value string, similar to Python's dictionary that you learn in the foundation programming course. So you will have the variable that serves as the key, and that variable is associated to a value. So based on this URL, we can know that this particular video has key equal to dqw4w something. And if we try to click it, yeah, it will go to this video. The video of, yeah, Rick Astley. And if you try to put other strings in the v variable, you will go to another video that is valid and registered on YouTube. But yeah, do this at your own risk. Now, more URL examples. Remember that same video. If you look at YouTube, there is a button for sharing, right? And the share button here will provide you with a URL, but in different form. So here you see that the URL is https://u2.b/the videos ID. Now, let me ask you, based on my previous explanation, try to break down the URL components. So let me ask you these questions. What is the communication protocol? And also, what is the path? So, can you answer those questions? You can share your answers directly via voice or type it in the chat box. Okay, Shafiko says that the first one is HTTPS. Yeah, that's right. So whatever you see on YouTube is encrypted during transmission. So whether you are using ISP like IndiHome or First Media or 3 or XL or Indosat, nobody can see the data packets that is being transmitted from YouTube server to your device. They cannot see the data packets. So yeah, it's secure. However, whatever you requested to a particular domain, like a YouTube or Google.com, whatever you type to make a request to YouTube, to Google, to DuckDuckGo, the ISP can know about that, can track whatever you visited, because some ISP employ tracking to record the domain names that you requested from your web browser. So the ISP can know whatever sites that you are visiting, but they cannot know the data packets being transmitted between your web browser and the website. Okay, in the private message, Mozart mentioned U2 is the domain. Yes, U2 is the domain name. So U2 is the domain name in this case. Okay, let me send it to the meeting. And then another Vico mentioned .com is the top level domain. Well, not exactly Vico. See that we have this URL u2.be. U2 is the domain name, and then BE is the top level domain. So whatever is what is BE domain? Let's see. So YouTube or Google, to be exact, they requested a domain name from Belgium domain registrar. So maybe Google or YouTube ask, or well, not asking, but rather they pay certain amount of money to Belgium DNS registrar to get this U2 domain name. And they can assign, once they are granted the U2 domain name under the PE top level domain, Google can have an alias. So U2.be is alias of youtube.com. They can make that kind of mechanism to map a domain to another domain. So they can associate u2.be to youtube.com. And the remaining here is the path DQW4W9. And that path is automatically translated to the video that you can watch in the web browser. But continuing my previous explanation about alias mechanism, it's not actually that simple. In this, if we are using alias mechanism in this example, usually alias only map the domain name to another domain name, but that doesn't cover the remaining paths in the URL. So yeah, one possible solution is, I don't know, maybe in YouTube server, they have a component that resolve that if whenever there is a request to u2.be and the path followed by the ID of the video, the user will be redirected to this domain instead. So instead of using the same alias to make youtube.com and u2.be as equivalent domain, they might have put a mechanism to redirect. So if there is a request to u2.be/something, then that request will be redirected to this youtube.com URL instead. Yeah, that's quite complicated, right? If we are looking at actual web application. And yeah, at a glance, it's interesting how YouTube purchased this shorter form of YouTube domain, right? They purchased youtube.de domain. And yeah, that is called as domain hack if we look at the Wikipedia article. So yeah, it is usually used for URL shortener like bit.ly, or in Indonesia, we also have s.id to shorten a domain. So if we take an example, like we want to shorten google.com, and that google.com will be shortened to, wait, yeah, I guess, yeah, will be shortened to this URL, s.id/1gmomnor capital letters, and then at the end there's an O in lowercase. And yeah, YouTube purchased that domain, youtube.de, to provide a shorter form of the actual URL. Another example. So previously I displayed this website, pmpm.cs.ui.ac.id. This is the course website for the course that I teach this semester. Beside platform-based programming, I also teach software quality assurance course. And yeah, the website is hosted at faculty server. And in the same server, there is another website hosted for advanced programming course. So it is possible to host multiple sites or web application in the same domain name, but we need to be able to address each site differently, right? So we do that by using subpath mechanism to distinguish those two websites. So if we try to type https://pmpl.csui.acid, it will go to the software quality assurance website. But then if the URL contain a path /advproc/, then instead of serving the software quality assurance website, it will serve the advanced programming course website. And does anybody have the rough idea how to do this? Maybe somebody already has an experience setting up web server. Not yet. Yeah, the keyword here is reverse proxy. So usually in a web server, we have a component called reverse proxy that will be served as the gateway from the internet and your websites or application in the server. So let me go back to the website here. Let's say I try to monitor the log of the websites. Let's say I try to access the software quality assurance website. Each time I make a request, it is handled by the reverse proxy here. And then once it's recognized the request, it will return the corresponding web pages. But when I type advproc/, you can see in the logs of the reverse proxy, there is a request to get this advproc path, and since it is a valid request, it will return the web page associated with the advanced programming course website that is hosted in the same server. And how to do that? Well, I can show the example of the configuration user in the server, but how to do this? Actually, you will learn more in a more advanced programming courses, like in advanced programming, and also in I don't know if operating system also will cover this aspect of configuring a server to make it can serve web pages. But yeah, this is the example how the server is configured. So if there is a request to the root path, i.e. the path without any postfixes string, then it will serve the HTML file in this directory. But then if the address contain a path to a string, advproc, for example, then instead of serving the index HTML used for serving software quality assurance website, it will serve the index.html that containing the website of advanced programming course website. So that's one example how it works internally. Any questions so far before we continue to the next slides? Let me check. Nothing. There's still no questions. Discord is also still quiet. Okay. So that's I don't know. Well, it's similar to the diagram that is displayed in the slide. So whatever you type in the web browser, it will be created as a request through the internet to the web server. The web server will perform some computation like determining which HTML page that will be returned back to your web browser, or whether the request is need to be forwarded to another server. That's what happened in the web server. It could be simple as directly retrieving the corresponding HTML page, or it could be more complex, like forwarding your request to another server. But then at the end, a response will be produced, and that response will be sent back to your web browser. And yeah, later on, once you already able to deploy and build a functioning Django application, the application can be accessed through your web browser and is sent through the internet to a domain. In this case, your application is hosted on Heroku, right? And once it reaches Heroku, many things happening in Heroku's side. So once it reaches Heroku's, it will see whether there is an application associated with the same domain name found in the request. And if there is an application associated with the domain, then Heroku will route the request to a server that hosting the requested application. And once the request reaches the application, the request will be parsed again by the application to determine which page or functionality that will be executed by the application. So for example, if the URL contains /contact, then the request will be handled by a piece of code that is associated to handle a request with /contact in the URL. Similarly, if the request contain a URL with /login, then the application will invoke the function that associated with that URL pattern, that is the /login. And in another example, /projects, that /projects will be handled by another function that will produce a web page, and then that web page is returned back to the web browser. So, yeah, to give you an example from a Django web application, let me open something. I have an example. Oh, later on, you'll before I forgot, the previous tutorial, i.e. the tutorial 0, that tutorial is only for you to set up your development environment and practice on how setting up a Django web application from scratch until you can deploy it to Heroku. That tutorial serves only for that purpose, and it won't be graded. So make sure you are at the end of tutorial 0, or more exactly before we start with another tutorial in this coming Thursday. Make sure you are able to set up a Django web application project and can deploy it to Heroku as well through GitHub. So that's the minimum result that I expect after finishing the tutorial 0 from last week. And later on, you can compare your attempt in setting up Django with a template that will be provided by the TA. So TA will provide you with a Django web application template that you can use for further development in your subsequent tutorial sessions. And this is one of the templates that I currently experimenting with. So let's try to make the font bigger. So usually in every well, not every, but the best practice in setting up Python's project is to create a specific environment that is different from Python's installation in your own computer. So usually when you use Python, you will use Python that is provided from the official installation that you use from Python's website. So if you downloaded and installed Python using Python's installer from the official website, then Pythons will be installed at certain location. It could be in program files or in the app data. But then that Pythons actually can be considered as the system-wide installation. So this is the Python that available globally for every users in your computer. So if you have more than one user, that, for example, if you are sharing your computer with your family, where each family member may have their own username in your computer, then, for example, your father or your sibling can call Python.exe, that's Python, in their own user account as well, if the Python is installed in as system-wide installation. But then sometimes when you install software packages in Python, like you can try install PBP install request, a popular software package to send a request to a web server. This package will be installed system-wide as well. So later on, if your father or your sibling use their own account and then go to the Python and try to import requests, they can do so because the request package is installed system-wide. Now, the best practice is to keep the system-wide packages to be clean as possible, meaning that try to install project-specific packages to their own environment. Therefore, in the tutorial 0, you were asked to create a virtual environment using a Python module called VENV, virtual environment. And once you already created that, you can activate it. And everything that you perform during when your virtual environment is active will only modify your virtual environment. So your system-wide Python installation will not be affected. So for example, if I install a package like maybe install 8, this flag 8 will only install in here in the virtual environment. See? So all packages that you install during when your virtual environment is activated will be stored locally in this virtual environment directory. And the system-wide packages will be clean, will not contain any software packages that is specific only for running Django application, for example. Running server, wait. Okay. Maybe I haven't. Wait a minute. Manage a PY. Okay, so let me go to here. Okay, if I just try to type localhost without anything, it will fail because there is no application running on port 80 in my computer, so it will fail. Therefore, in order to access your local Django application, you need to specify the port number, port 8000. And this will be, you can see also in the log messages that there is a request to the root path, the single forward slash, and also a request to the any files in the application. And this is handled by let me open my editor. Yep, in this file, let's save. So in Python, if we look at the slide again, there is a component called URL routing. So it will parse the receive request URL. So for instance, in this example, I just sent a request without any path after the domain name. So once this request is received by the web application or by Django, Django will look for a valid pattern to handle that request. And since there is no path after the request, the Django will decide which one should be used. Since the request doesn't contain any path, then it will use the index function located in views.py. So it will return the index.html file, where the content is just a hello world message. And for example, if we see at the URL routing, so this is called as URL routing. In the defined patterns in this file, there are two possible paths. The first one is the path where the URL doesn't contain any path. And then there's also another path where the path contains a string hello. And if we try to access this, let me zoom it in. It will, the Django will receive this request and see, oh, there is a URL that containing hello string. Yeah, if we see the log messages, Django receives this URL, and then this URL, the Django will look up what function should be used to handle this request. And in this example, there is a function specifically for handling that request. That is the hello function here in the views.py. And in the views.py, the hello request will perform some computation. Let's say if there is no query string in the URL, then Django will return the HTML where the name of the visitor will be randomly chosen from the existing list. However, if there is a name in the request and in form of the query string, then the web page that is returned to user will contain the user's name. For example, let me go back to the here. Name equal, let's say, Ricky. So that query string hello question mark followed by name equal to Ricky will be received by Django from URL.py from the router, and then it invoke the associated function to handle that URL, the hello function. And in the hello function, it recognizes that the request contains a query string. And the query string is valid because we only recognize name in the query string. And once it is recognized, we get the value associated with the name variable in the query string and display it immediately to the web page. But if we, for example, give it a variable or a query string that is not valid, that we do not recognize, let's say job, then it will produce an error because we explicitly, in this example, implement that if there is no name queries, there is no name in the query string, then assume that request is an invalid request. Therefore, return a response that displays an error. So from your web browser, you send a request in form of URL and also a path containing query string usually. And when that request received by Django's web application, it will be parsed, will be read by the Django, and Django will decide which function that will handle your request. And then once Django found the appropriate function to handle your request will be processed by the function, and the function will return a web page, for example, or it can also redirect you to another page. Yeah, your function can do many things, and you can refer back to the Django's documentation to learn more what other abilities that your function can do in Django. So yeah, that's quick overview on how Django works, from typing your URL in web browser to how Django handle that request from your web browser. Any questions before we move on to the next slides? Okay. Yep. If there is no questions, yeah, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, this reminds me, somebody, I actually forgot his name, but it's in my note, but I don't open my notes currently, so I forgot who asked the question before. So when we develop a web application, we can have two sides of main focus of where we do the programming is. We can program or write codes to create a client-side application or a client-side program, or we can write code for implementing a server-side program. So you can write codes for client-side programs by using the available technologies for developing a program that runs in the client that access a web page. In this case, you can write later on using a programming language called JavaScript that lets you to implement user interactivity in your web page that is displayed in the web browser. Similarly, when you write code for implementing a server-side program, you are implementing a program that will run in your server, which is in this case the Django web application. So Django web application is one example of a program that is running in the server side. And Django will obviously will run as a Python program in your server. And the capability of Django is not only for returning HTML pages, right? But also to perform some other computation, and might also redirect your client's request to another web application or even to another domain. That's also possible from within Django. Now, the web pages itself, while it can be generated in server side, the code, especially the code for the interaction that involve user events when they are interacting with the web pages, is the part of the client-side program. So you can view Django as a server-side program that can produce a client-side program that is delivered to the client, which is the web browser of your user. So for example, let's check the, this is the HTML page that is returned to the user when the request contain the visitor's name. The content of the page here can be considered as dynamic, meaning that there is a part in the web page that is not hard-coded. For example, this hello, visitor name will have its content generated based on input from user. So when the user's name is Ricky, then it will produce hello, Ricky. And if the content is, if the name is empty, it will contain a randomly selected title. So the content here will be dynamic. It will be generated based on the result of computation in the web application, in the Django itself. But then there is also content that is statically defined, like the following tag here. This is an example of Django template. This is the text written here already defined statically. It won't be transformed or changed once it is delivered to the web browser, because from the server side, the content already fixed to this text will only contain this text. And anything that, any input that is received by the application will not change this text. So it's already been defined statically in the web page that will be delivered to the web browser. But then regarding the client-side programming, later on when you try to implement user interactivity in your web pages using JavaScript, you write the JavaScript codes in your Django project. So later on, you will have, let's say, JavaScript file in your Django project, and you can write some code here. For example, document get element by ID, blah blah blah. You will learn about this later on. This code, which is a part of JavaScript code, will be delivered along with the web pages that is returned to the user. That's why I mentioned that the server-side program, which is the Django web application, will generate the client-side code, because the code itself is already in your Django project, right? The JavaScript codes. Therefore, the client-side code will be delivered from Django to the web browser. And then the client-side program will run in the web browser to provide user interactivity to the user that is running the web browser. And yeah, the difference here is as follows. So server-side will be executed on the web server, obviously, but the client-side scripting or program will run in user's computer. In this course, we only develop a client-side program using JavaScript that will run in browser. And other difference can be seen whether we can inspect the actual source code or not. In example of a client-side script, we can see the source code because it is delivered along with the web pages. In this example, the GS is there, yeah. So from the course website here, it includes a JavaScript code along with the content. And we can check the JavaScript code defined in the JavaScript file delivered along with the HTML pages to the web browser. These JavaScript codes will be executed by your web browser. And also, since it is a client-side script, we can also see the source code. But then the server-side script referring to the Django's application, where we cannot see the source code, right? Because it's stored in the server, and common user doesn't have access to the web server. And yeah, how to create a server-side program where there are programming languages that can do that using PHP, Ruby, Python, and also Perl and Java is also possible. So you can develop a Java application, or if your project foundations was based on Kotlin, if I remember correctly, for those who who enrolled as international class students, your program foundations, I remember, was taught using Kotlin, right? You can develop a Java application or Kotlin application that will become a web application, and that application can be deployed in the server as well. But then, if you are writing a client-side program, then you will use HTML to define your web page layout, CSS to define the styling, how to configure the layout, and to provide the look-alike of your elements in the web page. You will use CSS for that. And then you will also use JavaScript to provide user interactivity and to handle user inputs in the client side. Yeah, up to this point, the distinction between client-side program and server-side program. Is there any question, or are you still confused about the difference between client-side program and server-side program? Anyone? Any two? Is it already clear enough to see the distinction between client-side and server-side? If there is no response, I assume it's already clear. Okay, so yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions or speak out your mind in the Zoom classroom. It's better to ask question now before you got lost later on. Okay, considering the time, we already only have 10 minutes left. So when we are going to develop a web application later on, we can develop the web application in any way we want, right? Let's say, let me restore. Maybe just go back to the shell here. Let's say I want to create a web application using Python. In this hello world, I can create a virtual environment first. Oh, right, I forgot to deactivate the previous virtual environment. Activate, and then I try to activate the new virtual environment, which currently empty. So it's still clear. It doesn't have any software packages installed in the virtual environment. And I'm sorry, I can use a text editor to to begin developing my own web application. And theoretically, when we are writing a program, we can write all of our code in single function, right? So let's say if we develop a program using Python, we can define a function called main, and then verify if the application is run through Python's interpreter, then call this main function. And yeah, starting from this, you can maybe handle GDP requests using the existing components provided by Python. For example, Python actually provided HTTP server. And it's possible you can build your own web server using this same HTTP module in Python. We buy HTTP server. Yeah. So right now, we are running a HTTP server built in Python standard library. So it is serving HTTP on port 8000. And yeah, the idea is we can somehow maybe for HTTP and use some programming and that's using example. I do not remember the API of or the functions provided in HTTP module. So what I'm going to describe here is just an idea or pseudocode. And then when you are able to identify HTTP request, then you also need to be able to map HTTP requests to a function. So maybe what you need is you have the URL and URL here. For example, it could be well, not URL, but the request string. So for example, slash hello, and you need to map the request string to a function. You could have another function where you return an HTML page here. HTML. Here is from the name string given from the functions. P plus P if request string then hello in request string, then we will return hello string, for example. Yeah, that's the rough idea. You can do this from scratch, from zero, using existing Python standard library or maybe using other packages. Again, why bother? I mean, developing web application is a common use case, right? There are already thousands or maybe even millions of web applications out there, and the developers already produced them frequent enough, and they think that instead of having to copy paste previous solution to build a new one, they try to design a reusable code that can be used as the base for developing a new web application. So that's why you learn Django. You use a web framework that already containing a set of libraries and tools that you can reuse. The keyword here is reuse. So you can reuse the provided libraries, functionalities from the framework in order to build your own new web application on top of that web framework. So instead of having to write from zero everything from handling the HTTP request to map the path pattern found in the URL to a function in your application, you don't need to care about that. You do not need to write the implementation from zero. You can reuse the mechanism provided by the framework. And by doing so, you can be more productive. You can spend more of your time in actually implementing the feature of your web application instead of having to set up the infrastructure of your web application from zero. And yeah, this is basically what I just explained before. So you already have building blocks to assist you building a new web application. And the one that we are going to use in this course is Django. And yeah, basically this is what I already explained before, but I only have covered these three components: URLs, views, and template. The model here, I haven't provided you with an example, and I believe the tutorial this week will not cover the model yet, but model is essentially the Python code that will represent the data that will be stored in your application, because application usually involving data, right? Data that is generated by user or submitted by user, and also data that will be displayed to user as well. And the data can be obtained from another sources, like from another website or from data source such as database system. Yeah, this model will be covered in later tutorial. And yeah, I already explained this before. Yeah, the models here will contain the representation, the Python representation of the data that will be displayed in your web application pages, and the data usually will be stored in a database. And yeah, I think that's all for today. And as for the, wait a minute, the attendance, remember that in starting from this week, your attendance needs to be noted through the attendance module, and that attendance module is available at Scaling. So in order to mark your attendance as present, you need to use a password to do that. And the password for today's session is, yep, this one. So to mark your attendance in the attendance system on Scale, use this password to label yourself as present in the online class session. So while you are labeling your presence on the attendance system, any questions before we end the class session? Or maybe even a feedback, like if I speak too fast or didn't explain clearly, just mention it publicly or even in private. So right now, I don't see anything in the chat room, and there is nobody speaking on Zoom. So yeah, feedbacks is important, okay? So if I didn't receive any feedback, I assume everything just went well, okay? So if there is a thing that I didn't convey properly, or if there is a part of the lecture material that is not yet clear to you, just feel free to mention to me. Okay, it's already 11:40 a.m. So we reached the end of the class session. So thank you everyone for participating and attending this class session. I think we will see each other again in Thursday lab session at uni. So yeah, thank you and see you this Thursday. Goodbye everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.